This is Marlene Chiquan, I'm the oldie oldies. I'm having a blast here, meeting all the young people again that I grew up with and enjoyed so much. And I think everybody here right now is just really excited about seeing each other, and it's a blessing, Diane. And her co-marks here got us all together, it's beautiful. And our speaker today is Robert Sarmas, my diaper.
Well, you want me to say something? Hi, everybody out there. Is there anyone out there watching? Yeah.
Here they are.
I see them all. Wow. Okay. Hi.
Here's the camera.
It's been a while since I've met with the Yoga group, and I'm so excited to hear what Robert has to say, and hear there's some brand new things that I have not heard of. I think some of you have, but I have not. And I'm looking forward to it. I just reread his book last week in preparation for this. Who's next?
Did she abandon you?
Aviv.
Well, come with, take him to the microphone
Okay.
and I'll follow you with the camera. Okay? There you go.
It's amazing how technology, the cameras just follow you automatically. Isn't that right?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Give me a little credit.
I am Hamid Mazda, or Hamid Reza Mazda to be full name. And I am the Farsi translator of the Iranchi book. And I am scheduled to complete the Farsi translation in exactly 1 year and 10 months, in August of 2024.
That's wonderful.
And that is my significant contribution to the Iranchi movement.
Wonderful.
Good now, the next person.
I'm Phil Calabrese from San Diego, and hosting this meeting technically that will feature Robert Sarmas. Maybe I should say a few words while I have the camera here.
Sure.
Robert is a real explorer. And let me just read a couple of these things from behind his last book that says he's been recognized. For instance, the Saturday Telegraph, the Sunday Telegraph, London says, it may be the answer generations of experts on the ancient world have been looking for. And BBC World Service says, did Atlantis ever exist? The answer to that is emphatically yes, if you ask Robert Sarmas. Radio National Australia, Robert Sarmas is a modern day Indiana Jones. And CNN, Atlantis may have been found. ABC News, the quest to find the lost city of Atlantis has begun in earnest off Cyprus' southern shores. And there are more. So we're going to get an update because there's new information that's come through the satellites, I think.
Hand it over to our famous diver.
And of course, Robert is here to give us the newest.
Are you ready
I'm ready.
to get started?
Should I share?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and share and we'll get started.
Okay. Welcome, everybody. You take your time, get your grub. I have something very, very exciting for you today. I actually made a video about this discovery just a couple of months ago. How many of you, can I ask, have seen that video? It's called Discovery of Garden of Eden. Just a couple of months ago.
Oh, no.
Okay, no. Okay, so you're in for a treat today. I'm going to show you the Garden of Eden tonight, exactly as it's described. You're going to be among the first people to have seen it in 34,000 years. And I'm not just saying that I can prove it. I'm gonna prove it. Not only to the UV readers, but to the general public, which if they have any kind of reasoning skills and can believe what their own eyes see, they should be able to accept it as well. So, how many of you know anything about this project?
Just learning.
Okay, so most of you don't know anything. All right, well, this has been going on since 1998. So this is a quarter century of work. The results of a quarter century that you're going to see today. It took that long. Back then I was doing, how much time do I have by the way for this?
Forever.
I don't want to bore you guys.
5 minutes.
5 minutes, no problem. Back then I know a lot about mythology. I've done a lot of work with mythology, comparative mythology, tying the characters in the Urantia book to mythological characters that descended through the thousands of years. And that's when my fascination and more like obsession with Adam and Eve began. When I was researching, and I do put the UV under a microscope, I study it letter by letter. And that's the only way you can really understand this thing. It's just so packed with information. Every sentence is a revelation. And you kind of have to know how to read between the lines when they want to tell you something without making it too obvious. Anyway, while I was studying the papers, especially the Garden of Eden, obviously what piqued my interest is that there are a lot of physical clues. Where it was, what it looked like, which way it stretched, how many miles long, very specific directions, which for a person like me is irresistible. So back then, I'm going to show you how much we knew about the Mediterranean seafloor. This is about as much as was available at the time. Get this out of the way.
Excuse me, Robert, is it possible to make your projection full screen?
Yes.
It is full screen here.
Yeah, but I mean,
I think Phil would have to do that.
there you go.
Okay, so what you're looking at is the Mediterranean Sea. Here is Cyprus down here. You see the pointer? You all see it?
Can I ask a question? Are you
Sure.
gonna- Is this being recorded? So you?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, what's that? Thank you. I appreciate you all being here. I told Phil, anytime there's a room full of people that can even remotely understand what I'm talking about, I'm very appreciative. Because as you know, there are very, very few. So here's Cyprus over here in the Eastern Mediterranean, and here's the Gibraltar right here. So what the Urantia book describes is that the movement of the tectonic plates, the European plate and the African plate, where they meet is right here in the Gibraltar Strait, or back then it would have been the Gibraltar Bridge between these two continents. Things have changed a lot. This is what it looks like now. And if you can see how basic the data is. This is what I saw back then in the New York Public Library map room, which I frequented quite often, trying to find any maps that would show what the Eastern Mediterranean seafloor look like. Now, if you don't know, radar does not penetrate water. The only way to get a look about what's on the seafloor is through sonar sound, which pings through a ship or side-scan sonar device that drags behind the ship and bounces off the seafloor, comes up, and through the length of time that it took for that ping to come back, that echo, the computer on board can figure out exactly the distance. So as the ship is moving along, every second or every few seconds, it sends one of these pings, comes back, the computer records it, these all become little dots that a computer can then put together, and all of a sudden you have a 3D model. Back then, there were no 3D models, and I was living in Boulder at the time, and I went with Don Green, great guy, who's no longer with us. We went to the NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Association, which I believe is in Boulder, their main headquarters, if I remember correctly. This is all going back 25 years now. We went in and I was looking for anybody that had maps that would show the underwater features in the Eastern Mediterranean, because the Urantia book says that it was in the Eastern Mediterranean, and I'm going to show you the clues that they give us. So I was trying to see, if this book that purports to be a revelation is actually giving physical clues and challenging me, because I'm either going to be able to prove it right, or I'm going to see it as bogus. And I already believed in the book, there was no question in my mind, but I figured that this was one way that I would be able to prove the veracity of the Urantia book to the general public. And so started a 25-year project, which only came to fruition 2 months ago when I produced a video that's on YouTube. It's called The Discovery of the Garden of Eden by Robert Sarmast. Basically is the same thing that I'm going to show you tonight. So before long, I realized that there were no maps of the Eastern Mediterranean seafloor. They don't exist. This was about as good as you could hope to make it, which isn't much. This is not going to show us that long rectangular peninsula stretching westward from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, quote unquote. And so I started to look for, are there any scientists in the world that have it? Are there Syrians or Israelis or Cypriots or Turks or anybody that has dragged a sonar device in the Eastern Mediterranean that can give me a high resolution, a good look? And I wrote people all over the world. The answer was always no. Me and Don Green, when we went to NOAA one day, we talked to one of them. Of course, we couldn't tell them why we're actually there. But we told them that we're looking for Atlantis, because Atlantis is it comes from Plato, so it has more weight. People know more about it, and they're completely fascinated. Atlantis is really a universally attractive story, from scientists to laymen to children to their grandparents and everything in between. Everybody is fascinated. So we told him that that's what we're looking for, if I remember correctly. And he went to one of his drawers and he dragged out a few 100-page stack, and he said, we got this a few years ago. It's been in our drawer. And I couldn't believe it when I could get my hands on it. I was incredibly inquisitive about this, and the obsession was starting to set in, and it just built up through the years that followed.
25 years.
Yeah, well, in those early years, I was just hot on it, staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning, looking at these maps. There was a period I remember where I was looking at text on paper, trying to see if because each line tells you the latitude, longitude, and depth. So I was literally looking at this 400-page document and trying to figure it out, if I could even envision something that looked like that. It was that difficult at that time. The maps I'm going to show you tonight didn't exist then. I can't imagine it. I look at it now, I'm like, 10 years of my life went into this thing could have saved 10 years of my life. But this is the forefront of, we're at the very edge of technology with this. As I was saying, radar does not penetrate. Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Radar does not penetrate water, so you have to drag a sonar device behind the ship. And that's a very tedious, costly, almost dangerous kind of, I'll show you a video that will describe to you how we have to get an idea of what the seafloor looks like. Basically, we know more about the surface of Mars than we know about our own seafloors. Because we can, we just can't penetrate water to get a depth reading without a sound or ultrasound, a sonar device. So you see this ship is going and there's a beam coming from underneath the ship. That is a multi-beam. So it's on the surface of the water, and then behind the ship, you'll notice it's dragging a little device that is much closer to the seafloor, that's also taking another read. The sonar, because it is closer to the basin, has a smaller, a more narrow footprint, but because it's closer, it gives a much higher resolution look. The multi-beam gives you a wider footprint, but it gives you a very low resolution. So for us to be able to really get any kind of a detailed look, you need to drag that sonar, you need to do zigzag lines, incredibly time consuming. Each turn takes 3 hours. See, and then the computer generates an image like that. Once everything, all the information comes in, and remember, these are just dots that the computers connect and create a 3D model. So we did a lot of, I had to basically work with Michael Weisenbaker, one of our brothers, and a geophysicist, a very good geophysicist who passed away a few years ago, Patrick Lowry. We started talking and said, why don't we create our own maps? Because these maps simply don't exist anywhere in the world. I'd already checked everywhere and everywhere. So with this data that I got from NOAA, we sent it to Patrick Lowry, and then I'll always remember, getting that rolled up map by FedEx that had generated an image of what it looks like down there. And this was it. So this is showing the eastern shores. This is all underwater, all these colors. The colors are coded to show depth. So the red is maybe 500 feet down, the green is 1,000, the blue is about 1,500 meters, meters. So this blue area here is about a mile down. And lo and behold, there is a neck. So let me go over the clues that they give us in the Urantia book, just so you're familiar. Don't be acrobat, don't fail me now. Don't ask me to do any passwords, okay. All right, so the first clue, ooh, where'd it go? There. Everybody see? Yes. Okay. We're told that it was a long, narrow peninsula, almost an island. Long, narrow peninsula, projecting westward from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea. This Mediterranean peninsula had a salubrious climate and an equable temperature, so it's tropical, This stabilized weather was due to the encircling mountains and to the fact that this area was virtually an island in an inland sea. While it rained copiously on the surrounding highlands, it seldom rained in Eden proper. So it describes an Eden Peninsula and an Eden proper. It was all the Garden of Eden, but what they're describing is a peninsula versus the area in the neck area. Here's all the Urashima. The coastline of this landmass was considerably elevated. So this is a long, narrow peninsula that is considerably elevated above the water. And the neck that connected to the mainland was only 27 miles wide at the narrowest point. See, these are the things that drove me crazy. Physical clues. I can't ignore these things. The great river that watered the garden came down from the higher lands of the peninsula and flowed east through the neck to the mainland and thence across the lowlands of Mesopotamia to the sea beyond. So the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. And what do we know so far? Is a long, narrow peninsula, is greatly elevated, and it has a great river that waters the garden, which comes down from the higher lands of the peninsula. So it's a mountainous peninsula where water is generated from the mountaintops. It comes down these mountains. There's four tributary rivers, the 4 rivers of Eden. And that's how the garden is watered. And it forms one great river called the Great River, which flows eastward towards the mainland, and then it goes beyond the mountains there and goes all the way down to Mesopotamia. So this is a very, very large and lengthy river. That's quite a distance. Okay, so yeah, it was fed by 4 tributary rivers, which took origin in the coastal hills of the Edenic Peninsula. So this long and narrow peninsula had a mountainous nature where water was formed. It came down to the actual park, the Eden Peninsula, and then flowed out. A zoological garden was created by building a smaller wall just outside the main wall. So at the neck area, before it became a peninsula, in the Eden proper area, there was a very long wall that was, I guess, 27 miles wide. And then there was a smaller, shorter wall just a little further in towards the peninsula. In the intervening space between these 2 walls, they put all kinds of wild beasts that served as additional defense against hostile attacks. This menagerie was organized in 12 grand divisions and walled paths led between these groups to the 12 gates of the garden, the river and its adjacent pastures occupying the central area. So you have a long wall in the neck area, about 27 miles wide, with 12 gates. Each one of these gates then leads to a walled pathway, which are coming at angles to a shorter wall. The only way you can get to the shorter wall, the main wall, which once you enter that, you're inside the Garden of Eden, is through these walled pathways. In between these walls, and it's 27 miles wide, there's 12 of them, so you figure every 2 miles, you have one of these wall pathways that you can only get on by entering the larger exterior wall. And you get into this wall pathway, and that was the only way to get to the second wall, the inner wall. In between these wall pathways, they had all kinds of animals. I assume deadly animals, lions, bears, snakes, whatever. Nobody would dare to go in there because you'd be eaten. So they had a zoological garden. The protection it gave this place is really just astounding, as I'll show you some images later, this was impenetrable. There was no way you were gonna get into that peninsula unless they let you in. So at the center of the Edenic Peninsula was the exquisite circular stone temple of the Universal Father, the sacred shrine of the garden. So in the middle of this, there was a stone temple. To the north of the temple was the administrative headquarters. To the south were built the homes to the workers and their families. To the west provided the allotment of ground for the proposed schools of the educational system of the expectant son, while on the east of Eden were built domiciles intended for the promised son and his immediate offspring. So that's, the east of Eden, we all know this from the garden, from the Bible. East of Eden, some of these things, these physical features have come down to us through the Bible and many other places. The Persians, like me, we kept the story very much alive. Actually, the word paradise comes from Persian paradis, which means a walled garden. But it wasn't just Persians, it was as I'll show you later on. The architectural plans for Eden provided homes and abundant land for 1 million human beings. So originally we thought this has to be a large landmass. The peninsula had been overrun by lower grade gnatites for almost 4,000 years after they left the garden, when in connection with the violent activity of the surrounding volcanoes and the submergence of the Sicilian land bridge to Africa, the eastern floor of the Mediterranean Sea sank, carrying down beneath the waters the whole of the Edenic Peninsula. And notice it doesn't say the Eden proper, it says the Edenic Peninsula. Concomitant with this vast submergence, the coastline of the eastern Mediterranean was greatly elevated. And this was the end of the most beautiful natural creation that Ganesh has ever harbored. The sinking was not sudden, several hundred years being required completely to submerge the entire peninsula. Those are the main descriptions. So the Urantia book describes that the Africa used to be, let me get rid of this. But the Urantia book says that this, this point in Europe and this point in Africa, this Strait of Gibraltar used to be joined. And it says that due to the volcanic activity and earthquakes, this Strait of Gibraltar broke and the Atlantic Ocean poured into what was basically a much, much lower, it was basically desert, spotted with lakes and lagoons, and filled it up like a bathtub. And we're told that as this water rushed in, the Sicilian land bridge, so here's Sicily, this used to be higher up. It says that this land bridge here was submerged. So this water that had come from the Atlantic Ocean, and just so you know, this would make the Niagara Falls look like just a drip in your sink. It's about 10 miles wide and 1 mile high. It would be stronger than an atomic bomb, what it did to that basin. But basically, just imagine an ocean, 10 miles of it dropping a mile, crashing in and obliterating, cauterizing anything on its path, basically. So it comes, and then the Sicilian land bridge, we're told, sinks, so the water continues to come. And this basin sinks, the Eastern Mediterranean basin sinks due to the weight of the water pushing down on the mantle. Plus you have the volcanic activity creating pockets. So the water falls, the Strait of Gibraltar breaks, the water pours in, then the Sicilian, what used to be the Sicilian land bridge, sinks, allowing that water to go further east, and it fills up this area and pushes it down, sinking the whole of the Edenic Peninsula. While this is happening, we're told that the mountains of the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea were raised greatly elevated. So really geologically speaking, this is one of the most amazing areas in the world. That, I mean, that Eastern Mediterranean area, that peninsula, you're talking about it's submerged because of the sinking basin. It's flooded over. And the mountains to the east of it rise. It's almost like a sock in a washing machine. That's how I see it, because it didn't just happen once, it happened several times. Now, the scientists think that the last time this happened was 5 million years ago. We know from the UV that it's actually 34,000 years ago. 4,000 years after they left, they were here 38,000. So this all happened around 34,000 years ago.
Is Cyprus was Cyprus a part of that peninsula?
Well, that's what we originally thought. So let me show you some images now. In 2003, well, let me show you this a little. So what we did is, well, first we mapped it, okay? So this was the first image. And I could see this neck. Remember, we're told that there was a neck that joined the Edenic Peninsula to the mainland. And what we saw here is what appears to be a sunken land bridge or sunken neck. And not only that, but it's concave. Remember, the river was supposed to go through it. So that compelled me to keep going. Really, it's amazing how I was compelled to go one step at a time, year after year, with these little clues. You'll see later.
Is that the eastern side of the Mediterranean?
Yeah, this here, if you kept going up, it would be Syria. Okay, and then you have these two ridges here. Look how beautiful it is. And then you have this little area down here. So this was what appeared to be the Edenic Peninsula. I mean, we have the neck. It shows that it's curving upward. Remember, this whole thing sank. So obviously, you're looking for this neck to be submerged, and you're looking for evidence that there was a neck area that was submerged. But not only that, it had to show a river path, or at least you could dream of it at that point. And sure enough, it's concave. It looked like a river path. So that compelled us to keep going. Here's another shot of it. We eventually created 3D models. Hundreds of thousands of dollars was spent on this, by the way. Here's the neck over here. You see it's concave. You see this lander. And this is the area that we were interested in. But more than that, I was looking at this exact area right here, because it's right in the middle of the garden. And it appeared to split that middle garden into 4 parts. I don't know if you can see it, but over here, it looked like there were 2 ridges with a bump in the middle. So this was unbelievable to me at that point, and it compelled us to keep going. I wrote a book called Discovery of Atlantis. The startling case for the island of Cyprus. This was published around 2003, and yes, you can see that Cyprus was a part of it. What we did is we created, or Patrick Lowry created models, 3D models that I could visualize how things would have looked like at different depths of water. So here's Cyprus up here, and this is stimulating what that flood would have looked like. Is what it's actually doing is just turning blue every 100 feet or so. Okay, so we're just filling it in, and as you saw over here, this was above, so the water would have stayed right at the end there, and then the rivers that came down would have flowed over here, and that at that point showed me that that is, and you can see the neck. You see the neck coming down over here. Okay. See that neck? You see how it's concave? So not only is it concave, but as it stretches upward, the Syrian mainland is right here. There is a river there that meets it. Obviously, I mean, if there was a great river going out through this neck and onto the mainland and then out to Mesopotamia, my first question was, is there a trace of that river on the mainland today? And sure enough, it's aligned perfectly with the Kabir River. Kabir River in Syria, just south of Latakia, actually means the Great River. Is that so? Okay, so yes, I think we have enough to write a book. I wrote a book, and I obviously didn't use the Garden of Eden. I used Atlantis because Plato's description of Atlantis, which came from the Egyptians from 10,000 years ago, according to them, has an uncanny similarity with this area. And I'll get into that later. That Plato's Atlantis is really more about Dalmatia, but the myths combined later on. So here's the neck, and it goes up. I wrote this book, and we were talking to a lot of people, and they were telling me it's going to cost millions of dollars, which we didn't have. And I gave up everything, and I said, I'm going to go to Cyprus. I put all my stuff in storage. And I said, I'll be back in 2 months. And that turned into 3 years. Because literally the day after this book was published, I got a call, my phone was ringing off the hook. Everybody, BBC, you name it, yeah, everybody, which I really didn't expect. But it just seemed to have a life of its own. And it kept going and going. So I moved to Cyprus to see if I could launch an expedition to drag a sonar device and look at this central area right here and see if there's anything there. Now, why were we doing that? Because the central sector had a stone temple, a circular stone temple, which we're told didn't fall until the flood, which we know happened 4,000 years after they left. What kind of a stone temple structure can stand for 4,000 years? A colossal one. It was huge. This was a tremendous world-class temple of the Universal Father, most important place on Eden, in the central courtyard of which stood the Tree of Life that man had guarded for so long and had transplanted in the central area from his highland retreat to the east of the Caspian Sea, where it grew again for the second time in another stone temple of the Universal Father. The first one had already been sunk in Dalmatia. Man and Amidon had taken a shrub of that tree, guarded it, grew it again to the east of the Caspian, and then moved it here once they chose this spot, the most beautiful spot on earth, where it again grew in this circular courtyard. So anyways, 4,000 years old. It's colossal. It only went down after the waves came of this flood and the submergence. So that to me was a possibility. We could possibly, because there's so little sedimentation in the deep sea. There's a lot more, obviously, near the coastline, but in the deep sea, and the people have a lot of, scientists never like to say that they don't know, and sometimes they throw wild figures. One of them said it was 1 inch of sedimentation every 1,000 years. Another one said it was a foot. Nobody really knows. But in that deep sea, if it was that large and it was in a circular formation, then I said, if I can go to the central area where I can see the 4 quadrants with a hill on top of it, if we can drag the sonar device directly over that thing, we might be able to pick up on the circular shape. Just to the north of that circular temple of the father was called a ceremonial mount, which is where the Edenites wanted to deify Adam and Eve, which he obviously resisted. This ceremonial mount was an enlarged hill. So they chose a hill and they built this ceremonial mount around it. I now know that that ceremonial mount is none other than the origin of all the ziggurats in the world, where the kings and queens would go on top, and they were considered the link between heaven and earth as they stood there on top. That was the ceremonial mount. So we had two things that could possibly be seen with sonar. Of course, it was a long shot, but I was young and I wasn't gonna let this go. So I moved there and, you know, I walked down in the hotel room that first day in Cyprus and there were tons of photographers and journalists. What is going on, you know? I just published this book. It wasn't a big deal, but it was taken as a big deal. Cyprus really liked it because it was good for their tourism. And they're usually really into mysteries as well. And it was about their island and it connected their island to Atlantis. So you can imagine the excitement there. It was big news. So while I was there, I met with people that had ships there. And before I knew it, they were offering me their ships for research, for cut rate prices, because we made deals with them. They would get marketing and publicity and so forth. And so we set off. Let me see, here's a picture of Patrick Lowry. We took him with us. He was the geophysicist that created these maps and models. I did not tell him or anybody else except our inner group that this was really about the Garden of Eden, and that the clues were actually coming from the Urantia book, because that would have ended our project immediately. So by cleverly substituting Atlantis, we got to do what we needed to do. Patrick Lowry, after it was all done, he found out he was not happy. The guys that owned the ship, they found out just before the second expedition, they weren't happy. There was simply no other way for me to do this. And when I meet them in heaven, I'll apologize to them, but this was a biggest archaeological discovery in human history. I could not allow these people's ignorance to stop them. So I had to do what I had to do. Anyway.
They're gonna be there waiting to thank you for doing it.
I hope so. Patrick Lowry passed from a heart attack a few years ago. I'll show you some videos that people have made about the desiccation of the Mediterranean Sea. And what this flood looked like, just so you can get. So right now they're going in the core. Those are the tectonic plates shifting apart. Once these tectonic plates move apart, then what used to be a land bridge becomes a strait. When it is closed, because of the high evaporation rate in the Mediterranean, basically all this water evaporates, leaving small lakes and lagoons here and there. This was all considered heresy by the scientific community up until early 1980s. Nobody believed it. What happened was that a geophysicist named Dr. Hsu, HSU, in I think mid-1970, they went and they took a core sample in the Mediterranean. So they take a very long pipe with a ship, very costly. They drill it down, they hit the sea base, the basin, they keep drilling in. See, there's 6 million years ago, it was actually just 34,000 years ago. There's a lot we still don't know. They take a core sample, and what they found as they kept drilling is that there is a huge salt deposit on the basin of the Mediterranean Sea. And the only way you could have that much salt, it was 1 mile thick salt layer on the bottom, which meant that the Mediterranean had evaporated. There's no other way to get that kind of salt deposit. But it wouldn't have been 1 mile thick, which proved that not only had it evaporated, but it had evaporated several times, which up until that point was unheard of, unthinkable, very controversial. They mocked this Dr. Hsu. They joked about it, you know. I don't want to get into these scientists, so-called scientists. They get on my nerves. But every single time you want to take it one step further, you have a bunch of naysayers there. So they made fun of them, but eventually by the 1980s, it became fact because it could not be denied. How are you going to have a 1 mile thick salt layer on the bottom of the Mediterranean? How did it get there? That can only happen through repeated desiccation. And so slowly, they started to form the picture that the Gibraltar used to be a land bridge, and that it must have broken, and the Mediterranean and the Atlantic water must have flowed in and filled it up to where it is today. And that because it is the meeting point of these tectonic plates, the African and Eurasian plates, then obviously the movement of these would break that, and this gigantic flood would happen, which is now called the Cyclean flood. We didn't know about the tectonic plates at all. Scientists didn't know anything about that until the late 1960s. Here's some simulation of what this, but really, I've looked at these videos, none of them can come close to what it really was. 10-mile long waterfall falling 1 mile down. I mean, Niagara Falls would have been just a drop compared to this thing. It was just ginormous, absolutely deadly. Of course, in mythology, the Strait of Gibraltar was known as where Atlas pushed it apart. Okay, so they thought that, like everything else, the gods did it. At that time, we're told by the Urantia book, there were millions of people living on the Mediterranean basin. It was the largest flood in the world's history and the most deadly. We've never seen a flood like that since or before. It killed probably millions as it rushed along. So the way it works is, imagine a bathtub, you open the faucet, the water comes crashing down, it moves along the bottom, reaches the other side, and then slowly starts to fill. Whatever's on the bottom is going to get the brunt of that force. Supposedly, I mean, they conjecture about the force of it, and every time I read about it, it's pretty nightmarish that this actually happened. Those people never saw it was coming. So I think I've shown you all the videos. That passes. This is the island of Cyprus. This can give you an idea of how beautiful Eden used to be. It would have had crystal clear water like this with volcanic rock. This is Cyprus too. So I went there, we did the expedition, it made worldwide news. It was literally on the front page of every newspaper in the world at that time. And the reason that I actually went through with this expedition is because about a month before this expedition was supposed to take place, we got new maps from new data that had been collected by a French expedition. And these were all usually governmental or they're people, gas and oil companies. They're the only people that would spend the millions required to get this data. These ships are extremely expensive, and we need teams of people, and water and electricity don't mix. You know, when we were doing it, every time we did it, literally every machine that we were using broke down at some point or another. Our technology for underwater research is still pretty primitive. A month before we did the first expedition, and I probably would not have done it if this image hadn't come out. This is that hill that we were looking at. Absolutely astonishing. Of all the hills, and then there's tons of hills and mountains there. None of them have any anomalies, except the one that I had pointed to. Right in the middle of that garden was a flat-topped mountain. And just like the story of Atlantis, about halfway down, there was the river, said that the rivers originated on the top and that they flowed down, met a large channel halfway down, and then further led down to a wall that was 3 miles in diameter. Even the distance matched. And then you have this right angle on this wall. So when we saw this, we were all astonished. There were a team of people there with me, Captain Robert Bates, Fred Harris was our attorney, Byron Belitsos was the publisher of the book. Saskia Ray Reed was the fundraiser. We had a lot of investors coming in with $5, $20. We had to reach, I think at that point, $120,000 for the ship, which was still way less than the millions that people told me I would need. So we pulled it off and we went, and probably would not have gone if this hill didn't have these anomalies. If it had nothing on it, I don't think we would have risked that kind of money and time and effort. But lo and behold, there it is. So, okay, that kept me going a little further. Now we did the expedition. And what we were planning to do is to drag a sonar device on top. You know, just maybe 100, 200 feet above it. So you get a small footprint, a narrow footprint, but you get a nice close look. And again, these are not actual images, but they're computer generated images based on that sound that is reflecting off the bottom. So here's the river path and the canal halfway down and the outer wall and what Plato called the Acropolis Hill, which to me back then was the central sector. These are what the images look like. This is that orange line down the middle. That is that's where the sonar device was. It's called a side scan sonar because it can't see directly under itself. It can only see to the side. So this is that wall. So we came back and they said, and we dragged the sonar device, but we were not able to see anything on top. We generated images. There was nothing. Here it is again, a top view. This is that hill. There's the canal, and there's the water. You know, I ran these by a lot of geophysicists. They had no explanation for it either. You know, this right angle and this lengthy wall, almost straight, running down. It was very strange formation. But having dragged this device, we couldn't find anything on it. So came back and we were sort of in the middle of things. Is it or isn't it? And we decided that the only way to tell is to do another one to get a closer look. So I'll show you what these lines are like. So these are each strip that you see here, they've been put together. Each of these strips is one reading. So the ship is going maybe 10 knots, can't go that fast. The side scan sonar is connected with a coaxial cable on a winch. Very expensive. The cable is more expensive than the sonar. 3 miles dragging behind the ship. And if you go too slow, the sonar is going to come crashing to the seafloor, you lose everything. If you go too fast, it's going to lift up. So the captain has to be pretty skilled keeping it. And then every time you want to turn, it takes 3 hours because if you do a quick turn, that coaxial cable will snap. There were a lot of problems. But anyway, after all this enormous amount of work, this is the side scan sonar. This was during the second expedition, which we did in 2006. This was partly funded by the Cypriot government, partly by the History Channel, because they made a documentary out of it, and we gave them the rights. This was the ship we used. It took at least a year of planning, and then you have 3 days. 2 of those days, 24 hours to get there, 24 hours to get back. You have 1 day of research for a year of planning. So when you're on the ship and the side scan sonar is down there and you're taking readings, the air is electric. You can cut it with a knife. We flew our flag on top of the ship. And I like to think that Adam and Eve were watching. We were flying Michael's emblem on top of the ship looking for the Garden of Eden. And it was a trip. We would sit inside the control room with all the computers. There's Patrick Larry. The guy on the right is operating the winch and the side scan sonar. There's about 10 or 12 scientists there, about 6 or 7 cameramen and History Channel people. And when that side scan sonar was going above the hill, and we're looking at the reading as it's being trailed 3 miles behind us, pretty intense. The first expedition, the generator broke down. Another ship had to come give us another generator while they were side to side, kind of really dangerous. Every time we did it, it was just a nightmare in terms of the number of things that were going wrong. So this was our target. This was me giving everybody a review of what we're going to be doing, where we're going to be going, and why. Here's another image that shows why we're so interested in this area. What the heck is this? And why is it on that sole hill, right in the middle of this area where I had pointed to before we could even see what's down there? This was actually inside the sonar room where these guys are controlling the length and the depth of the side scan sonar. Pretty intense.
Excuse me,
Yes,
how deep is that area?
a mile down. Yeah, 1,500 meters. Yeah, a mile down. That's pretty deep. It's not abyssal. I mean, they can get a lot deeper than that in some areas in the South Mediterranean. But 1,500 is considered deep sea. So there are very few machines, few sonar devices, and the length of the cable you need, and the people that are knowledgeable. It was really a miracle that we could pull this off. There was a lot of synchronicity going on during this. Like that map just happened to come a month before our expedition. Probably would not have done it without it. And yet it convinced me to keep going. And every step, there was some kind of synchronicity event happening. It took literally until the week before the expedition for the funds to finally come in. It was nail biting, everybody was watching. The critics were having a heyday with me, the naysayers, they're everywhere. And they were having a good time with me, but I was also having a good time with them because they didn't know what I was really doing. They couldn't know. I was like, well, I have some other sources, that you guys don't know about, but I can't get into it. Well, what is that gonna do? Nothing. They just saw it for, a foolish expenditure of money. The Cypriots at a point were not happy about the money that the government gave us to conduct this expedition. It wasn't enough to do it. The History Channel paid for the ship and other things. That was the second expedition. So anyway, the second expedition, actually there was a point where, so we're doing a beeline, we're gonna go over the wall and the top of this hill. And so now our ship has passed it already by 3 miles. The cable and the sonar are 3 miles behind us. So now the cable, the sonar is about to go over and give us an image. It was just an electric moment. Everybody on the ship was just frozen. And just as the sonar was going to go over it, every computer and device on the whole ship in our room, the control room, blinked out. I'll never understand what that was about. It was pretty, to take that long to get there, and all the people and equipment and money and all the stuff that we had to do to make this happen. And then it just blinked out. But Patrick Lowry, thank God he was on board, and somehow he got the systems going again. And then we did a few runs over the wall. We were interested in the wall because we were going to use a sub-bottom profiler which can penetrate and see what's under the mud in a very, very limited way. But what we needed to see, is that wall natural or is it fake? Is it man-made? That's what we were after. And that third time that we went over, I believe, Patrick Lowry, this was the reading that actually came from there. And what it showed was that this cross section of the wall, he drew these lines on it, looked at me and said, it's natural. It's not man-made. So that, after 10 years of that kind of ruling, it was a huge letdown. I'll never forget the ride back on the ship. It was kind of rough waters. And I was just in a daze. Did this just happen? Are you serious? It's nothing. There's nothing there. So it was a huge disappointment, not just for me, but a lot of people that worked hard on this. And so I came back to America. I got married. I had kids. But every year I would write to Dr. Hall, my friend, who's the top expert geophysicist in the world in that area. He knows more about it than anybody else. Every year I would write, is there new data, Dr. Hall? Are there new maps? Is there anything that can show me this area closer? Nope. 10 years went by, 15 years went by. Every year the answer was no.
Somebody's trying to save you from yourself.
Yeah, no, he was actually very appreciative of our work because we wound up creating the first 3D maps and models of the Eastern Mediterranean seafloor that even the scientists did that. It was literally the first peak that humanity had at that area. Here's the side scan sonar as we lowered it into the water. Got all tied up in knots at one point. They had to cut it. It's so difficult. It's really unbelievable. Now they have what's called autonomous underwater vehicles where you can program it and just let it loose and it'll go do its own thing. You don't need a ship and then come back, give you a nice little drive. But there are only a few of them in the world. They're extremely expensive. So cut to 2022. And I write Dr. Hall once again, my annual, hey, Dr. Hall, it's my annual email to you. How have you been? Are there any new maps and models? So, well, yes. I said, where? And he said, it's actually online. So I'm going to post this. I'm going to show you this. You can actually go online and see this for yourself. This was done by the European Union. The email, the address is, you can see it on top, portal.emodnet.imetry.eu. If you go there, this screen will come out. Then you want to click on the 3D. I've already clicked on it. If you click on the 3D, here's the Mediterranean. And I was astonished as I zoomed into this that, oh my God. It's crystal clear. And basically they've mapped the entire planet above and below land. So this is what you're looking at is the fruit of human technology and progress. For the first time, we can look at the entire world at any part of it and see what's above land and below land. Which is really just astonishing. I mean, I'm not that old, but I remember on the news when I was a kid, hearing how a new island that nobody had never known about was found. You know, now we're like, it's just amazing the progress in our lifetime. So, as you can see, here's Cyprus. You remember what the model looked like. Here's Latakia. Here is where that river, the Kabir River is, and then you can see the neck and you can see that concave area coming down. So we always thought that the river path must be going through this concave area, the neck area. But as we got a hold of new maps and models, something else appeared. The river path did not flow through this, what we thought was the concave neck area. The river path flowed onto the ridge to the south of it. This was not visible to us until a couple of months ago. This meant that because of the lack of data and erroneous data, all the work that we had done was in the wrong area. But what was great about it is that what we did find matched the Urantia book exactly. I'm going to show you. What you're looking at right now, this here, this is the Garden of Eden. I mean, I wish I could make this large. But isn't, it won't let me make this full screen.
It's the coastal region of what country?
This is Syria. You can go online and do this yourself. This is the first time I've let people know where it is. But from the very beginning, you know, people said keep everything secret, and I said no. You know, if somebody wants to do it before me, this is too important. They should be able to do it. So I'm going to colorize this for you a little bit. This is Latakia right here. So everything you see here, that red border, that's the least depth. Then a little below that is the green area. And then below that is the blue area. Now let me get rid of these lines, geographical grid. I can actually put depth contours. The depth contours will show you how deep it is. If you want that, there's also the track line of the ships, where they went, surveying tracks. This is the track line. So these yellow lines show the zigzag patterns of the ship that surveyed this area very recently. And this is the data that they collected, is how they got to generate these images, convert them to 3D models, and then put them on the internet for everybody to see. This would have only been a dream to me back in the day. I mean, it's just unbelievable that I'm looking at this right now. What it showed, oops, again. Here's Latakia up here. I've been there. It's in Syria. As a note of interest, right now it's the main port for Syria, and right now it happens to be the main port for the Russian warships. So 38,000 years later, this place is still riddled with danger and war. Nothing has changed. Believe it or not, they still have sanitation problem with their waters. Just like the story of Eden, remember, man had to convince them not to throw their garbage in the water. They still have problems there, so hasn't changed all that much. So I'm gonna spin this around so you can see. Here's your long rectangular peninsula. It would have come all the way down here. And you can see it as it curves downward. Right here. Let me show you an image so you can imagine it a little better. Where did that go?
Robert, do you have an idea how much higher that was than the coastline?
Right, so as the Mediterranean, that's the Garden of Eden. What it would have looked like. As the basin sank, the mountains on the coastline rose. So it kind of, before it used to be pointing downward, that's why the river flowed eastward and out of the garden. So right now it's like this, back then it would have been more like this. Complete tilt.
And where did all the water come from?
The water came from the coastal hills, we're told,
We're at the very tip here.
which were at the very tip.
What's the URL on that?
Well, this one is I've drawn this with Photoshop, but the map itself, portal.emodnet-bathymetry.eu. You can go in there and check out the Garden of Eden for yourself. Now, so basically, here, this gives you a side view. Look how, remember how it said that it rose sharply from the seafloor to a great elevation? Well, here it is, right here. From here to here is about a mile. And here's the river path on the mainland of Syria. And of course, not only do we have a long rectangular landmass stretching westward from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, what else do you see here? A river path.
Oh, yeah.
A very, very distinct river path. Moreover, what else do we see here? Mountains. Remember how it was a mountainous peninsula where the waters flowed down from the higher elevations? So imagine, this area would have been above water, right? This is the long rectangular peninsula right here.
Wow.
So as that water, so you would have had mainland, then water, then rectangular peninsula. What the winds, as they hit this peninsula, would have gone up here to this mountainous region and collected water. That would have been a very high waterfall. So they would have had a constant supply of water due to the cooler waters coming up to a warmer temperature and then going straight up this very high ridge, and that would have created something like, where is the pretty picture I got for you? Something like that.
Oh, my.
So there were 4 tributary rivers. Obviously, one of them would have been right here. Why is it goes next? See that?
Yeah. Is that a river that goes along the top there that?
That's the Great River of Eden.
Oh,
And you can see it coming down and meandering through the entire length of this peninsula. Clear as a bell. Twist around a little more so you can get a better look.
so where would the river originate from?
The river originated from the highlands, just as they said. So the highlands are right here. You have, remember how it said it's surrounded by mountains?
But it's going into Syria.
Yeah, it's going to Syria.
Because that was higher.
Yeah, it used to be, right now it's like this, before it was like that. So it would have flowed out, it would have formed the 4 tributary rivers, would have formed on these highlands. We can't know where they were exactly, but certainly one of them was right here, because that definitely would have been a spot like that image I showed you. There's no way you're gonna have cool water and cool winds getting cooled because they're going over the sea and then suddenly coming up and going to a great height. Will always collect clouds, will always produce water, waterfall. So that area would have been full of waterfalls. It would have been absolutely stunningly beautiful.
Just as out of curiosity, this peninsula that you're showing us, where was the first place you were looking compared to this? Like,
Oh, okay, I'll show
can
you.
you pull out and show us?
Yeah.
Want to repeat the question?
Oh, and the question is, where was the original area that we were looking at? And it's right here. So remember from those rudimentary maps, incomplete. We believe that the river path, the Kabia River, would have flowed here and then onto this area. So this was the area we were originally looking at.
Close.
But yeah, it's not that far. We actually went over the tip of Eden with the ship
All right.
when we were, let me see if I can find that. Oh, here it is. You see that? Here's where we were the first time. See that wall? See the wall right here?
Yeah.
I know this area like the back of my hand. Here it is. See? That's where we were, and it's actually here.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Oh, it's close, maybe 5 miles.
Wow.
We went over with the ship, and I gotta tell you, I don't know if I was imagining things, but I swear, when we had to go all this way to make a turn because you don't want the side scan sonar to hit the floor and get destroyed. We went over with the ship, and I had a weird feeling when we did. At that time, it didn't enter my mind that it could be here. There was no way for me to know, but I did have a feeling that I can't explain. Here it is.
That's so cool.
So,
And where is Cyprus right now?
So are you taking questions now,
yes, here's Cyprus right here.
Robert? Are you
So
taking?
it's actually, look, it's much, much smaller than we originally thought. But actually, in hindsight, it had to be much smaller than we thought because they said it's a long, narrow peninsula. How can it be long and narrow and be a huge territory like we had originally envisioned? It's not narrow. This isn't narrow. This is narrow. So, ladies and gentlemen, after a quarter century, I give you the Garden of Eden.
Yay.
Exactly as they described it. Long and narrow, rising sharply off the seafloor, going to a great height right here. 27 miles would have been something like this. So one thing I should mention is that this part that's underwater right now, and that's everything out to the red. This is the Edenic Peninsula, but what they told us is that the neck at its narrowest point was 27 miles wide. That's like something from here to here. So this would have been Eden proper. Eden proper is still above water. It's the Eden Peninsula that went under. Eden proper is right now mostly Syria. it's very difficult to know exactly what this looked like before all the geological activity that we're talking about, because you have the coastal landmass rising greatly, and then you have a sinking basin, and then you have the flood and the rising water. It's really geologically astounding what happened here. And not only once, but several times. So it's an exact match. So I'll finish this and then we'll take questions. I'll finish this by giving you a question. I want you to get a full gist of what happened here. The Urantia book, published in 1955. Most of it was supposedly out 1930s, right? 30s?
Earlier.
Yeah.
Or earlier. Let's say 30s. Talks about the Gibraltar, talks about the tectonic plates shifting apart, the Gibraltar being breached, the Atlantic Ocean rushing in, flowing eastward, the Sicilian land bridge sinking, and the water going further east, all the way to the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, coastline where it is now, and then slowly pushing down on the mantle and the basin sinking. There's only one Russian scientist that I know of that has called that area a sunken continent. Other than that, currently scientists do not know about the sinking, but they do know about everything else. But here's my point. Science didn't know about tectonic plates till late 1960s. Science didn't know about the desiccation of the Mediterranean Sea until the late 70s. Science didn't know about what's called the Zaiclean flood that happened up until maybe 20 years ago. And we didn't have these images of the seafloor until about 2 years ago. How can a book published in 1955, know about tectonic plates shifting 20 years before we even knew what tectonic plates are? 30 years, 40 years before we found out that the Mediterranean used to be empty. 50 years before we knew that the Gibraltar had breached and all this stuff happened and filled up the Mediterranean, really till 1980s and 90s was when it was confirmed. And how did it know? 90 years before we had this image that you're now looking at, that there was a long, narrow ridge stretching westward from the eastern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, where you can clearly see the sinking of it, right? Look at it. You can see it. 90 years before we had these images, they knew that there was a long rectangular ridge or peninsula that would have stretched up to the coastline because the whole area had sunken in, and had a river running through the top of it, and that met on the mainland with a river that's currently still on the mainland that is translated to mean the Great River. Here it is. This is a topographic relief map. This is Latakia over here, and you can see where this river path used to be. Now it's just a trickle that flows into the Mediterranean. Before it would have been a great river flowing out. I have some images of that river, what used to be the Great River leaving, as it is right now in modern Syria. If I can find it. I don't know if I brought that one. But anyway, how could a book know 90 years before humanity did that such a natural feature would be down there? and know about the Gibraltar, and know about the tectonic plates, and know about the floods, the Crimean flood, the sinking of the basin, and also show a mountainous, not only is there a river path, not only is a long rectangular peninsula rising sharply off the seafloor, going to great elevation with a river path down the middle that meets with the path river that's on mainland right now, but it's also surrounded by mountains where we can clearly see would have given origin to waterfalls and rivers. How? You know how? There isn't a way.
Yeah.
The chances are 0.04. So originally, when I did this, I wanted to prove to the world that the Urantia book is correct. I learned along the way that really, people don't accept spiritual. Oh, here's the river as it's on land right now. This is what that area looks like. Yeah,
What's the name of that river?
Kabir River, Kabir. Yeah. So what you're looking at. This is where Adam and Eve walked.
Wow.
This is the park, the great park of Eden. They would have lived to the east of Eden, around here. We know it was like 5 square miles. To the north were the administrative quarters, the education system, and where the workers lived. The wall would have been here, somewhere around here. It didn't necessarily have to be straight. This is about 27 miles wide from here to here. And so what they did is they had a long wall over here with 12 gates. Each gate led to a wall pathway. And look how perfect this would have been. In order to get even close to this area, you would have only been able to go through the channels, the grooves inside this mountainous area. So before you even get close, they've already funneled you in to very specific areas where it can make guarding of this area much easier. So somewhere from here to here would have been a wall. With 12, every 2 miles, there would have been a gate. You get into the gate, you get into wall pathways, you better not go outside those wall pathways because you were going to get eaten alive. Then you would get to a shorter wall close. If you pass that, you now were inside the Edenic Peninsula and not just the Eden proper area. It all makes absolutely perfect sense. There is no way a book in 1955 could have known these things. Not only known them one at a time, but put the whole story together in a coherent whole, with none of these things being known at that time. So I don't want to even pretend like you can prove something to people that don't want to believe, really. They don't want to. It doesn't matter, even if you found the temple right there, they still come up. It fell off a ship. Their mind is not going to accept it until their hunger for truth and righteousness grows. It'll put up every kind of resistance. But I can't prove it to you. And anybody that looks at this, even if they don't believe in your Urantia book, you're going to have to explain to me how this can be. Out of this book in 1955, no, this was there when we just saw it for the first time, humanity, just a couple of years ago.
There's a question here real quick.
Yes.
So you mentioned you were disappointed at the end of the first expedition when you found out the original location you were looking at was not man-made.
That was the second expedition.
Was it?
Right.
So were you looking at a man-made structure?
No, that's what we found out using the sub-bottom profiler. Sub-bottom profiler is separate from the side scan sonar. That was another thing that we had to bring along. You lower it as this box. I think I have some pictures of it.
Well, what I'm asking is, it sounded to me that you were looking for some kind of man-made structure, and when I forget his name, he told you, he said, no, this is not man-made. This is
Yeah.
natural. and you were upset. Yeah, so were you looking for a man-made structure?
It
But
looked-
that is not a man-made structure, right? What you found out that the peninsula is not a man-made structure.
No, but it's, well, I mean, what we wanted to do at that point was to bring physical evidence. Let's say I find a wall, let's say this is a sub-bottom profile on the screen. This is something you lower and it sends a much more. It's very complicated, but basically the main problem is the energy to force that much energy to go below the mud and then give you a signal. This is the gizmo that gave us that picture. And that picture showed that it was a natural formation. What we were looking for is to say, hey, you know, there's a brick wall there, because that would show, because it's much harder than mud. And that would have a strong signal and come as darker signal. And that would show, hey, look at this dark signal in a straight line making a 90-degree turn. Either that or go on top of that mountain and find some kind of circular formation, maybe those large stone temples, you know, the wall. So that's what we were looking for to prove it to the world, because that would have been undeniable, but we were not successful.
Wait. Sorry.
Yeah, I can see right here, it says that the great river that watered the garden came down from the higher lands of the peninsula and flowed east through the peninsula. So it's exactly as it shows.
Exactly.
Yeah, the river goes right down the neck of the.
Right down the middle of the park or the Edenic Peninsula,
Very interesting.
right up to that rise, you know, because it all got sunk down a mile. You can see it. And then to put the cherry on top, there is a river right there, a famous river, which translates to the Great River. Can all this be coincidence?
Robert, where would the Eden proper, you said Eden proper was up right at Syria?
Eden proper is still above land, right here. So this is what you see that's gone underwater. And remember, the UNESCO says the whole of the Edenic Peninsula. These were like, now I can nail it. Before I couldn't, because it didn't quite make sense. But now with these images, it's nailed. The Edenic Peninsula went down, not Eden proper, which was this whole area.
So what would have been an Eden proper?
Eden proper was for pasture farming. Yeah, a lot of this is where the wall was. There was a long wall, and just inside that, I can show you, you know,
So these might be able to be found in the future.
there, you know, a wall, finding a brick wall from 38,000 years ago, not with current technology, maybe 100 years, I doubt it. Our technology is still very primitive for this kind of stuff, especially when the water gets involved, then it just multiplies in complexity. But I can show you some images of how we didn't forget. Humanity didn't. This is a recreation of Babylon. So Adam and Eve moved to Mesopotamia. This is the entry into the Temple of Ishtar and the holy area of Babylon. What do you see over here? A walled pathway that's raised above ground that leads into a temple, a wall. And this is just the exterior, the interior wall. There's another wall that's not shown here. And that's how you get in. And there's the ziggurat that would have been the ceremonial mount, where a recreation of the ceremonial mount on Eden. So basically, you can see how the story of Eden left an imprint on humanity. Here it is. This one is in Egypt.
Where'd you get that other drawing, the one you just showed?
It's online.
I have a question about the.
You use the mic.
Temple. Got any idea where on the peninsula or how far it was?
It was right in the middle. So I'll show you.
Any distances, where from the mainland, from Eden proper? Any ideas at all?
7-8 miles. I'll show you on the map later.
Oh, okay, that's one.
This is in Egypt. And the Egyptians, remember, were told that a very artistic group of the Adamites moved down to Egypt. That's why Egypt is so rich in art. Because the Rashba said it was an artistic kind of bunch. They moved down to Egypt, but they never forgot either. Here you see this river, water going under the wall, the outer wall, and then an inner wall, and then the sacred temple area. It's also left a permanent impression on architecture, particularly Persian architecture, with where they're still, it's called Charbak. Charbak means
The four gardens.
four gardens, the four sectors is what they remembered it. You had the central area, then you had, so the central sector is where the temple was, and then you had the four rivers, apparently. From what, sometimes you have to look further back based on what came down to us. It looks something like that. So this area, let me get that map again. This, obviously, what am I looking for here? I'm looking for a square or something, right? Where were those four tributary rivers intersecting? Look at this part right here. There seems to be something right here, right in the middle. Also here, I'm not sure, this is all, these two pockets actually here would have been two lakes. So you would have had a lake here and a lake here, and then you have a ridge down the middle. It could have been over there. Obviously, you see how neat that river is still meandering after all these thousands of years, right through the top of it. And then going all the way up and then being met by the Kabir River up there. It's astonishing. Look how beautiful this must have been. The waterfalls that must have come down here. Is this where Sarpatia jumped and drowned himself in the river? This is where Adam and Eve and their children used to walk and play. You're looking at it. I mean, when this map came and I was looking at it, I was just astonished. I couldn't believe it that I'm looking at this thing after 38,000 years.
Where were you when you started looking at this map for the first time, and what were some of your impressions as it started to unfold in your mind?
Well, I knew exactly what, by that point, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I couldn't believe it was so clear that everything matched the alignment of the underwater river path with the mainland river path, the mountains, let's say we got this image and there were no mountains on the side of what appears to be this river path. That would have been weird, right? Because it's supposed to be water forming on the highlands, flowing down and forming the Great River, which then flows out through to Syria. But lo and behold, it's there. So every single thing matched. While I was doing this, I was involved in another project where I was discovering who the Exodus Pharaoh was. It was Ramses III, by the way. There's another video I made about that. It's really interesting if you like history. So my mind was just being blown left and right. I didn't expect this doctor. I've been doing this since 2007. 15 years I've written this guy every year, and every year the answer was no. So I wasn't expecting it. And then I went on the site and I noticed that, oh my God, look at the impression. Look how detailed it is. And then I found that they'd even turned it into a 3D model. You realize we have to spend, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars to get those very basic images. And then here it is, online free, with greater detail than anybody could have imagined. I didn't make these, that's what I'm saying.
How did they make?
They made it through ships dragging a sonar device behind them. And it's the entire planet. So they have accumulated and put together the entire above water and underwater topography of the planet Earth. So if you go to this website, you can go anywhere and,
On Google Maps too, they show.
oh, it's not gonna be this detailed. This is far greater detail. This is.
So Robert, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Actually, maybe two. There isn't, you haven't discovered anything that you would say was man-made. Yet at this point, is that right?
That's right.
And the second question is, when is the next submerged, what's the likelihood of being able to find something that was actually, not a natural thing?
The likelihood is much greater now than ever. And it is gonna be something that happens in the future, I have no doubt about it. Of course, I contacted my associates of previous years immediately, and they were all up and ready to go. But nobody's gonna be dragging a sonar device right off the top, the edge of Latakia right about now, unless you want to get your butt blown out of the water. Even when we went during peacetime, and we had multiple altercations, crazy things going on. There was a helicopter at one point we found out came from a British ship, and it just circled the ship with the front of the helicopter. There was a massive machine on the side of it. And it circled the ship the whole time. It was a cracked pilot. The whole time its front was facing us as it circled the ship. So it's like with the machine up pointing at us.
Right.
There was an Israeli jet that buzzed us, and they do a turn, check you out. What are these guys doing? This is in 2004, when everything in the world was still kind of normal. Right now, and plus on top of it, they found a lot of gas deposits down there, which is actually why we get these maps, because these gas and oil companies are the only ones that have the deep pockets to go and do these laborious track lines of this slow moving ship
That was gonna
going
be.
back and forth. Look at this. This is what they have to do. So these ships cost maybe $50,000 to $100,000 a day. And you gotta go these and then do a 3-hour line, and this represents right here, we did some work. So that's why we're finding this, that's why we have this map, because of that. But it also makes the area incredibly dangerous because they're already fighting over those gas deposits. Turkey is fighting Israel, Israel is fighting Cyprus, and everything in between. It's ours, no, it's ours. It's in our territorial waters, no, it's in ours. So there's almost like a war over this stuff already. So we won't be going there. If I could, I would. I'll take the danger, I don't mind.
When you were showing us the peninsula there a minute ago, you mentioned that, oh, this is where Adam and Eve, were raising their family. And that seemed to be on the west coast of that mountain range, the west side of the mountain range. But then you mentioned earlier that they were in the east of Eden. So
Yeah, over here. Yes.
okay, and then what's that, real light blue kind of up there? Up on the top, yeah, right
Here?
there.
Yellow? I've looked at it, I've spun around that thing for hours.
That's an indentation, that's not a mountain, that's.
No, it is.
Oh, I thought the yellow was Lefty.
Well, I'll go closer to see it. It's like a mountain.
Oh, yeah, and then that's the river coming through.
And,
So the river kind of formed a T. There was a river that kept people off of the peninsula because they would have had to cross the river. And then there was another river that went down the mountain range.
No, there was. They built a wall from here to here,
Where to where?
from.
I can't see, if you put your marker out in blue or the red, I can see it there.
Let me just point to it.
Okay,
So there's the peninsula going down. This is all Eden proper. Above land. So they would have built one wall about 27 miles wide, and then another one. So you would have had these angular wall pathways going to the shorter wall, and the river, they built it to go under the walls. So it actually had a, it would go under the walls and then they had a covered brick conduit that took all the trash and then emptied into the Great River a mile past.
They dumped down into the enemy's camp, isn't that right?
Yeah, and then that river went down here and would go down to Mesopotamia. So it was
Yeah, we thought Adam and Eve were such nice guys, and then boom, they dumped them in the trash.
well, it had to go somewhere, but, and of course, you know, what an absolutely ideal area for irrigation. Look at this place. Turn it around. So you have,
The name of the two intersecting rivers you said.
There are no, oh, yeah, that was on in the park, on the
Right.
peninsula,
You
yeah.
said it was called Choctaw. You mean back in the Rancho or Syria?
No, the Charbab is a Persian word. The Persians are famous for their gardens, and the word paradise comes from Persian, paradis, a walled garden. So the memory of this thing, yeah, they call it the Charbab. I'm just trying to show you that the memory of it. It left, even though it was 38,000 years ago, it left a permanent imprint.
Okay,
And it
so
came
in
down to
their
us.
history, they still have it as named.
They don't know where it's from, I mean,
Okay.
but yeah, they kind of have this hazy memory of a place they call paradise, which translates to a walled garden. Where there was this intersecting forest section, which matches with Urantia's description of the central center.
So it's a Persian name for paradise.
Yes,
And I'm sorry, again, it's what is it?
Charbab, Char means four, Bab is garden.
Okay,
With
great.
4 gardens, really, it's talking about those 4 sectors.
Four guardians. Four sections.
Right,
Okay, great.
we can remember, I mean, we think 38,000 years, wow, that was so long ago, but let me tell you something, I'm more immersed in it, obviously, a lot more than most people. I see Adam and Eve's fingerprints every day, all around them, because I know their story so well, and I've studied how things move down. I go to, you know, I'm watching TV and it shows an ambassador that goes to the White House and they're showing them the rotunda of the dome, the Capitol dome, and there's all the gods of Atlantis and Eden are being depicted there. The ambassador himself, the first ambassador, was something that started in Eden. I'm eating food and I'm like, this fruit and vegetable was probably created by Adam and Eve. I take my son. Look up here, you see that? One of my folders is modern day. He was, until recently, he was in modern day high school around here. Modern day means Mother of God. It's a Catholic school. So as I'm driving every day, I see a statue of Mary and Jesus, which, as we know, it says so in the Urantia book, it's really a continuation of what used to be the mother goddess, which was Eve and Cain. So I'm driving by it every day, you know, everywhere I look, the letters that were writing, I'm just immersed in it in every way. And trust me, their fingerprints are all around us, even after all this time, we just don't realize it. How much, and of course, their blood is running through our veins. And we have to forget that.
Just really quick, that was in Eden proper, or it was underwater, the 4 sections?
That was in the middle of the Edenic Peninsula, so it's already water. Yeah. Yeah.
Question?
Mhm.
Thanks, Andrew. Also, I remember you gave a talk on the dual personalities, mother and father, like the Greek origins and that fit kind of the Adam and Eve.
Mhm.
I remember you giving a talk on that. You didn't mention it, but you know, it's not about what's happening today, but it seemed very interesting that there was all this history that led into a woman and a man starting all those civilizations. And Have you followed up on that?
Yeah, it's, so let me give you a little quiz. I want you to remember the Adamites and the Nodites eventually joined and became the Andites. And so we're told in the Uresh book that their myths became kind of mixed, okay? So which one am I talking about here, Eden or Dalmatia? There were a group of gods, mighty men, who came to a island or peninsula and formed a wall. So all the savages were outside. They started to teach humanity how to read and write and agriculture and astronomy, all kinds of sciences. And they taught them the laws of civilization. They gave them a government. Eventually, something went wrong and their mission defaulted. They screwed up somehow. And then they made it with the human beings when they weren't supposed to. And they created a race of giants that went on to mate with the rest of humanity, and then a giant flood came and their fortress island or peninsula went below the waves. Which one am I talking about?
Yeah, where'd you get that?
Huh?
And a little bit of both, there's mostly Dalmatian.
Yeah,
Identical. Both stories are identical.
where did that come from?
Me.
Oh,
Well, because they're, part of my research is where did everything come from? And why is Plato's Atlantis the way it is? Plato's Atlantis is based on Dalmatia. But you just can't separate things that way because as time went on, the Adamites are intermingling with the Nodites. The Nodites have their memory and their traditions, which they pass down religiously, comes down to us today. And so do the Adamites. But their stories are so unbelievably similar, almost identical, like I just said, that there's no way that it wouldn't have been confused. So those mythological figures that you're talking about here, originally I thought they were Adam and Eve. I now believe it's really
Which is you,
about
as well as him.
most of it started with man. They worshiped him. I'm sorry, not then.
I'd like to do that.
I said,
Get them
Nod.
Right, that's what.
They're about Nod. And the Uresh book does confirm in certain sections. Most of these, what became idolatrous worship of statues before, they can be traced back to Atlantis. And Nod, once the Nodites separated, well, there were no Nodites, there were never supposed to be a race named Nodites. They were never supposed to exist. And a lot of the people that became the progeny of the Adamites, they were never supposed to exist. These are accidental races that were never supposed to happen. But once the rebellion happened and Nod and the rebels moved east to what is now called the land of Nod, which is in Iran right now.
Now it's still there, you can see it on Google Earth, you can see this green between the two mountains. It's perfect.
Right. The land of Nod is Elam, E-L-A-M.
So I looked up the Kabir, K-A-B-I-R river, and I put Syria, there was no results.
It's because we've got a couple.
El Kabir, E-L Kabir. E-L Kabir, right now it's a, I was very excited to see it. It's just a trickle right now, but as you go inland, it widens like that. Those images that I showed you, you can see kind of what it used to look like. There's also two, now that you bring it up, just to tell you how complex this whole thing has been. There's two Kabir rivers. Roughly the same. So one time I went to Lebanon, and I was there sitting, and I'm looking at the map, and I look on top near the Syrian border. There's a Kabir River, and back then I didn't know it that well. I said, "Wait, I thought it was in Syria, but it's here." So I'm in Lebanon. I'll just dash over there and take a look at it. Anyway, with all kinds of trouble, we got there, and then later on, I found that there's two Kabir rivers in the same general area. There's a south and a north. So the one you want to look for is the Kabir River up in the north.
El Kabir River.
Yeah, El Kabir.
In a few minutes, we will have to end this, but before we do, I want to thank Robert Sarnest, and I also,
My pleasure.
and I want to also thank our cooks who provided the turkey and the cranberry sauce, and of course, everybody else who brought in our side dishes.
I'm not your cook.
So,
Where are they?
but
Ron and Wayne.
Wayne is, I haven't seen Wayne in.
yeah, Wayne and Ron, and Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for making it possible. I put a video out, by the way. It's called The Discovery of the Land, Discovery of Eden, Discovery of the Garden of Eden. If you put my name, Robert Sarnast, and that, it should come up. It's basically goes over the same thing I just told you, maybe a little more organized. But I don't think many tarantula breeders know about it yet. Because it was sort of a, a lot of people got involved in that, and it was kind of a letdown that we couldn't produce anything at the end of it. It was a long shot anyway. These kinds of projects, they don't happen right away, If you look at the Egyptologists, and when they want to find a tomb, it's usually a multi-generational effort. Most of these big discoveries are. So to find it on the first trip out would have been kind of a miracle.
Okay, let's go.
Also want to thank all of you who tuned in on Zoom. If you put your email in the chat, we will send you more information about this and keep you in touch.
What if there's something interesting? My father was in the military, and I see you along with the program.
Want to take her the microphone?
It's not, well, I'm not sure if people are interested. You said Nad is in Ilam province in Iran. And between 1964 and 1970, there was a war in Iran and Iraq. My father was in the military. So we lived in, here's this Islamabad, which those days was called Shabadar. And we lived right there for 5 years, first 5 years.
That's where Daniel was, the prophet Daniel, that's where he's buried.
Where is, oh, you're serious?
Yeah,
Oh, how interesting.
he got thrown in the dungeon and the lions didn't eat him at all. Yeah, they buried him there. Because he worked for King Cyrus, the Persian king.
How interesting.
And that's where the capital was.
I would go straight there. I never knew that.
There's all kinds of stuff that's waiting to be found there. Really interesting. I could go there right now and drag a sonar device in that central area, and I'll bet I could find something. But
Robert, can you move into the audience and continue? Because we got to close things down.
move into what?
Well, just if you want to continue the conversation.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we'll shut this down, and if you guys have any more questions, I'll answer personally.
Great,
Okay?
thank you.
Very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Don. We really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
I think that river is called, Nar Al Kabir.
Yeah, now.